Welcome to the show, everyone. Today we have a special guest, as we always do. Corey and I met actually several years ago at New Media Summit. I'm guessing it was 2018, maybe. So at this
That's
point, it's been about 6 years, and he's got a new book coming out, and he's new to the show. If you're here on YouTube because you have found Corey or you're interested in his new book, The Enlightened Passenger, just know, hey, hi, I'm JJ. This is my show. What that means is I'm going to talk. So if you don't like me, which is totally cool, Corey, where can they find more of just you if they want more of just you?
so just me. I would say I would normally send people, well, these days because of the new book, I would probably send them toward the book would be one option. But then at the same time, I would send people on a social media hunt. It's all mostly at that speaker guy or Corey, Corey, Poirier, Poirier. That will get you pretty much everything about me.
Perfect. Great. And if you're on the podcast, obviously you have heard we are doing a video. So come on over to YouTube, jjflizanes.tv, so you can meet Corey. So Corey, so when we met, we were both speakers. We were both icons of influence at New Media Summit in probably 2018 or 2019. And you have a podcast, actually more than one, and you have a business. So why don't we go back a little bit so that everyone who's in my audience and people who are finding this on YouTube can really get to know you a little bit more and understand what drives you, what your passions are, and how we got here.
Yeah, so I guess sort of the backstory for me, or what I guess what would they call it in the superhero world? My origin story. My origin story is I grew up in a very tiny little town uh, called Summerside in Prince Edward Island in Canada. And so I grew up in this small, tiny town. It's the smallest city in the smallest province in the country. And I graduated from high school with a 49 plus one, meaning I barely graduated. I don't think I ethically graduated. I think I just legally did. I was raised by a single mother and kind of interesting, but I graduated without knowing the difference between fiction and nonfiction. I almost had a girl break up with me one time when she found that out. And then I also didn't read a book until age 27. So my origin story is certainly like not one of those likely to succeed type stories whatsoever. And then I basically left that small little town and moved across the country to a bigger city. And I got into the world of selling photocopiers door to door. So I would go into an office and see that they had a yellow photocopier, and I would say, I can magically make that white and also, magically make your budget shrink. But basically, I would go in and try to convince them to even talk to me about the photocopier because I'll be honest, it's the least sexy thing that anybody in their office ever wants to talk about. And unless it's breaking down or they had a lease on it and the lease is coming up, nobody even cares. And so it's hard to believe now when I think about it that for 10 years I made a half decent living selling photocopiers door to door. But that was, I don't know how far you want me to go into what I do now, but that was kind of where I started. And I really believe, even though at the time, I'm sure my family was embarrassed to say what I did. I know when I came home for visits, I didn't really want to say what I did, but I know now that it was a step that allowed me to do a lot of the things I do now because I got tough skin. I got to learn how to build relationships because, yes, you can sell and make money and mislead and lie to people, but I didn't want to be that person. So I was in an industry at the time that was very shifty and I wanted to be able to sleep at night. And so, yeah, I mean, I ultimately learned a lot about building strong relationships, even when people didn't want to buy initially, how to deal with no, rejection, and on and on and on. It was a really good learning ground for life.
So yeah, let's talk about what you're doing now. What did that lead to? And like, so one day you wake up and say, I don't want to sell photocopiers anymore. I want to be a blank.
Yeah. So honestly, I mean, this depends on when I look at I want to be a blank, when I look at that in my head, what I was thinking. But when I was younger, I always thought I want to be a rock star. And interestingly enough, I actually went down the path. You hear so many people say, I want to be this thing, but they never, maybe they get shifted or whatever. I actually went down the path. I released three, three music CDs. The last one was 2014. I was told by my first girlfriend, don't ever sing in front of people or you will probably have less friends. And I decided that I wanted to put in the 10,000 hour rule and get better at it. And so I went down the music path for a while thinking that's what I wanted to do. Playing, mini tours where I was getting paid to actually play and My last CD got nominated for Rock Recording of the Year, which I only say that because it's fascinating to me, considering I was told that I would lose friends if I ever sang. But that's what I thought I wanted to be when I was a kid. When I grew up, I realized I just wanted to impact lives. And so where I went from that selling photocopiers, how it actually took transition is I got tricked into performing stand-up comedy one night, which is the most weird path to where I ended up ever. But that the next day I realized that was like a passion for me. Even though I didn't get any laughs, I went back to the office and people are like, you have a different feel about you. And so I recognized that there's something here. And that evolved without all the little details. That evolved basically into me realizing I wanted to speak in front of audiences. Even though I was the guy originally that was covered in sweat and never thought that was my future, that's what I decided about my mid-20s. That's what I decided I want my future to be. Until a few years ago, 4 years ago, that was my future. That was what I did. Other than I always had a podcast on the side. I used to have a newspaper where I sold ads and we filled the newspaper like Success Magazine almost as a newspaper. But I always primarily was a speaker until recently. So yeah, that's, I guess, what I figured I wanted to be when I grew up. Once I got a little bit grown up, was a speaker.
Okay, so what kind of things were you speaking about? Like, what were you hired to talk about?
When I first started, I came from that sales background, as I said, selling photocopiers. So originally what I did was I went and ran my own seminars where I would charge like next to nothing, like $75 to for a 2 day how to sell seminar. And my reasoning behind that, JJ, was that when I first started, I was working for a Fortune 500 company, and they literally handed me a business card and said, it's blank, write your name on it. We'll give you 200 of those, and if you can actually prove you can sell, we'll actually pay for some. So that one of the largest companies in the world, and they wouldn't even buy me business cards. I got no training. They handed me a Zig Ziglar VHS tape, for those that remember what that is, and I put it in, and that was the only training I had. Ziegler was awesome, so it was good training, but that's the only training I had. And so I said, I never want people to experience that again. So when I started venturing on my own, I thought about those people that were in sales and their company wouldn't hire a speaker or a trainer. And I said, I want to run events for those people that are willing to spend $75 out of their own pocket to improve their sales career. And honestly, it was really popular. We'd have like every event I think we did, we probably had 80 to 100 people. Now, I was in a bigger small market at that point, Halifax, Nova Scotia in Canada. And so it was big enough that you knew almost everybody, and it was big enough to have different people each time or people that would refer others. But yeah, that's how I kind of got into it. And I also started teaching at the local college, teaching sales. So when I first started, it was sales. But what happened was pretty quickly, I realized, as strange as it sounds, I wasn't really that excited about sales training as I was about being a speaker, like a keynote speaker. And so I recognized I wasn't going to get booked like I thought I was to teach. There's very few keynote speakers that focus on sales. Jeffrey Gitomer, I think is his name, is the only one I can think of offhand. And so there's not many that actually you bring in to teach sales in a 45-minute keynote capacity. So I realized I had to change my approach. And so it's really weird how it changed. But this one day I went to a fast food restaurant. I was going to name them, but I'll just leave their name out this time. A fast food restaurant. And I noticed I went through for a week, and I was going driving for the other people at my office. And every time I went through, I'd leave and I'd open the bag and there was no ketchup. And it seems so minuscule and so minor. But I come back to the office every time, like, where's the ketchup? And I'm like, I don't know. They didn't give me ketchup. And they're like, maybe you should have asked. And anyway, finally on the 5th day of this week, like this was like 4 days, Monday to Thursday, on the Friday, I said, I just gotta ask you, how come you're not putting ketchup in here? And I looked in the bag and there's no ketchup again. They said, oh, our management told us that ketchup is costing too much. So now don't give it unless they ask. And I thought, well, my head right away, I'm like, couldn't you just put a sign at least on the window that says condiments available on request? But either way, I'm like, this company that's getting their ketchup for a tenth of a tenth of a tenth of a tenth of a cent, because if I told you how big they are, you know they're buying in big bulk, are willing to lose customers over cents when they're selling them dollars. And I looked, and we had spent, I actually worked at the numbers, and we stopped going, and that company kept ordering stuff for 3 years from other companies, restaurants, and I realized they lost, I think it was at the time, it was like $6,700 in business because of the ketchup. But my point of this is that I came up with this concept of we need to start teaching people to give people their ketchup. So I actually created this brand called Give Me My Ketchup, and I started teaching customer service. So that's, and to this day, I haven't been doing as many talks lately because of our new brand in the last 4 years. But to this day, I still speak on customer service. So that one never left, but I eventually evolved into a couple other areas. But customer service is kind of where I hung my hat. Quickly, the other two were reading and adjusting to personality types for salespeople. So I eventually got back to sales, but it was like real estate agents and things like that. But it was like the four personality types we all run into. I want to teach people how to sell using those personality types. So if you were doing an open house and you're a realtor and you had a husband and wife across from you, how would you adjust if they're different personality types? So I started teaching that. And the final one came after I done thousands of interviews with thought leaders. It was called The Timeless Secrets of Influential Leaders. And it was basically like Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. It was my version of here's what I've learned in all these interviews that the best of the best do so that you can do it yourself. So in a nutshell, those are the three things I spent most of my career speaking on.
It's funny how many parallels there are to you and Doug. And, Doug Sandler, his father was Dave Sandler. So actually, if Dave Sandler was alive, he'd be asked to speak about sales. So from Sandler sales training. And we've interviewed Jeffrey Gitomer. We've interviewed Zig Ziglar's son. He's been on our sales training for podcasters show. And so that's kind of funny. And Doug has his is all like sales. And then he also did customer service. I helped him we had a client in Baltimore. It was a pet grooming, boarding, and training, mostly dogs. And they had a couple different locations and they wanted a Sandler sales guy and they were networking with a Sandler sales guy. But then Doug, I don't know, she found Doug somehow. And then we won the proposal and he didn't really want to do it. I remember there was great law of attraction because he said, hey, I'm happy because he just moved to California. We had just gotten together and he said, oh, there's this training they want me to do back east. Do you want to do it with me? And I said, how much are you charging? And I think at the time it was like 25 grand. And I was like, no, that's not enough. And so he was like, well, I don't want to do it anyway. I'm like, great. I go, well, but you kept after him. And then it kind of like the price went up and the price went up and the price went up. And then eventually I was like, okay, yeah, I'll do it with you, but you have to charge more than that. And then of course, how we laid it out. So, customer service is really, it's so important for businesses to understand that when you service your customers and the things that like we created a journey, like the customer journey map, and we take people through the mapping process to see where you're missing revenue, you're missing upsells, you're losing customers because of catch up and stupid things that are costing you so much more money. It's like you're not like people that are in even in me teaching and starting my mastermind almost, well, at this point it would be 24 years ago, 5 years ago. I launched it in 2019. But even in that, like having people come and be short-sighted and not understand the long-term effects of this behavior, or, in marketing or in selling or in sales, and so many people, like sales has such a nasty, dirty word for a good reason. There are so many people that are just focused on the money, not the service, and not the relationship or the customer. And so I think, we forget that this is all about relationships. It's all about know, like, and trust. It's all about that long-term, like there's here in town where we live, there's a restaurant that most people like, they're like, oh, it's too expensive and whatever. And I'm like, right. But they treat me well. They know my name when I come in for my mastermind or my other deep dive. Like they make me these little menus that are specific to me. They put in all of the food choices that I have. And if it's gluten-free or if it's vegan, and like, you get treated right. And when you get treated right, you keep going back. And so it's so important. And because of the people aspect of it, and just one more quick story just about customer service, because I think it's funny. That company with the dog training, it was a husband and wife. They still own it. I think they're okay. I mean, hope they made it through COVID, but successfully. They may have had to close a location temporarily. But I remember for me, like coming in from my background, because I didn't have a sales background, but I'm a very good salesperson that I've learned over the years, because I believe in what I'm doing and what I'm talking about. It's to actually help somebody. It's not really about the money, but money becomes this thing that at least investing in yourself. And I'm sure you can speak to this too with what you do now, that, when you give something away, it's not valued as much as if someone has to step up and like put skin in the game. And there are people that don't see the energetic balance of overgiving for like you were, doing a little overgiving in your 2-day seminar for $75, right? But again, if we love like the people aspect, we're like, okay, cool. Like maybe you're getting quality time. Maybe that's your love language. So you don't care about the money, but over time, when you continue doing that, it robs you. It like depletes your energy because you're not being given the same energetic compensation. And it doesn't always have to be money, but for those of you that are listening, like you have to pony up. if you get something for free, most people don't do the thing you got for free, or you don't value it. Value comes when you have to step out of your comfort zone, when you have to, take whatever you've earned and then invest it in something. And then all of a sudden this energetic connection becomes a lot more important. And this husband and wife team, every time they'd have a complaint, because I was teaching customer service from the place of, well, I teach sort of this nonviolent communication strategy of understanding what someone's really like, what their real need is and what their feelings are, and listening, really listening and not getting defensive. And so the one thing we did successfully with that company is we reduced their legal costs, because every time they had a complaint, he was lawyering up. And we're like, no, 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 stop being defensive. Listen for what what their real need is, so you can address their need. And not only will you not have to lawyer up, you're going to get a customer for life, because they're going to feel seen and heard by you, like really seen and heard by you. And we teach the birds, use of the 4-part personality. I don't know if you do the birds, but anyway, so it's fun because I haven't had to talk about this I've never gotten an opportunity to talk about this on this show, because this show isn't about sales or about customer service training or anything like that. Although we've had talked about money. And I know that the things that you're teaching in the book that you just wrote, are all life lessons, and they can be applied to anybody, no matter what somebody's doing. So I have you that we're now, you're teaching customer service, and so let's talk about what's happened like 4 years ago. So there was a shift after teaching and speaking and doing TEDx's, and so now what happened 4 years ago?
So 4 years ago, I basically, well, and I guess if I worked a timeline, it was literally August, September 2019. So is that 5 years now? I guess it's approaching 5 years. And what happened was I had been helping people get paid to speak, get on stages, all that type of thing. And I had a lot of people coming to me saying, you've done X amount of TEDx talks. Can you help me figure out how to land one? And so we started doing that. And those things were going really well. But people started asking me for something very specific that I didn't know at the time, but didn't exist. So some people were saying, you're teaching me all this stuff, but do you have a stage I can get on? Like, I wish you could create a done for you where you could kind of do the work and I just show up. That was one group. The other group was saying, I wish there was a spiritual TEDx stage, like a TEDx style stage, but I could speak on spirituality. And so originally I was trying to find them the answer and I couldn't find it anywhere. So I remember I was at a restaurant with a guy from my mastermind. His name is Lang. And he did the 5 whys on me. If people have heard of the 5 whys, I say 5 whys. He just kept saying why. Like, so basically the idea is you just keep digging deeper. Long story short, I came out of that lunch and I knew I wanted to be called that I was creating. I wanted to be called Blue Talks. I knew I wanted to be BLU. I knew I wanted to be, again, a mixture of TED Talks and Chicken Soup for the Soul. So now I like to say if the two of them got married, went on a honeymoon, had a baby, we'd be the baby that crawled back. Blue stands for Business Life Universe, as I mentioned. And basically that allowed me to still have the practical talks, the business talks, the ideas could change the world, but also add in the spiritual talks and that type of thing. So ultimately, Blue Talks, if you want to say it that way, was born around 5 years ago. And we decided originally it was going to be like TED in the sense that we were going to film speakers and then release those talks. Now, the volume TEDx is doing now, they can release, I don't know, 100 talks a day. We were thinking, okay, we'll do one a week. Like, we were obviously just starting from scratch. And we filmed these 3 events. One was in Western Canada, one was in San Diego, and the third one was at Harvard. That was a pretty big up level, from 3 months to Harvard. But we filmed these 3 events. We got all the footage ready. Honestly, we didn't realize how long editing was going to take when we were all brand new. That took a lot longer. So we were planning to launch this whole thing in February. February went by. We told people, sorry, we had to push it till June. And obviously, after February, this is going into 2020 now. We know what all happened in March. All of a sudden, this little thing called COVID comes along. And now all of a sudden, JJ, we're launching a live event company at a time when everybody's saying, no more live events, sorry. And so we had already at that point booked, I think, 3 events with 30 speakers each. And now all of a sudden we're being told no events. And so we launched this Blue Talks thing. And it was, do we keep going forward? If so, I have to create more things. It can't be just the live events that are on hold for years. Or do we just shelve it? Like, do we deliver what we promised, but then just say, okay, now we're done? And I decided to keep pushing forward. It felt right. So we added a book series, like an anthology book series, a podcast, and a virtual stage. And then we officially launched Blue Talks with those 4 platforms that June, and kind of never looked back. So that's how we started. And then if I look today, we've done 36, I think, live events. So when you consider we only did 3 before COVID, that means we've done 30 some since COVID. That's a big number, especially when you consider we're traveling to each of those events. We're not doing them locally. We're all traveling there, filming them, editing them, and we're doing them at places like Harvard, Columbia, Oxford, Cambridge, like really big places. So it's a lot of work. I think we're averaging 1 to 2 every month, pretty much at this point since we started. We've done 12 anthology books with some of your friends probably who wrote the foreword. So we've had Dr. Joe Vitale write the foreword of one, Marie Diamond, James Redfield wrote Celestine, Ken Honda. We have one coming up with the late Bob Proctor, which how can you do one with Bob Proctor when he's passed? But I did an interview with Bob that was never transcribed or published. And I got permission from his son and his widow to convert it into a forward. And so having said all that, we launched Blue Talks with those 4 platforms, including the virtual and live. And, I'll say now we never looked back, but at the time we were sure probably looking back. But that's what we started 5 years ago when you asked what changed 4 or 5 years ago. And to do that, I had to stop taking so many speaking engagements. So that's where like now it's literally, it has to be so favorable for me to do the talk. It's almost rare that it can happen because I'm like, no, it has to be close to where I'm at. They have to pay my full speaking fee, even though I'm in a small town. Like I have so many, it has to be's that I'm kind of marketing myself out of the business. But honestly, my focus is on this Blue Talks brand. So that's what we're doing now.
Okay, and now I know you have a book before this. Do you have 1 book or 2 books before this?
So if we're talking solo books, I
Yes.
have conservatively, well, I have some that were interview type books where I interviewed people and converted that into stories, but I'm not going to include that because it's still their stories and stuff like that. So if I just talk books I wrote from start to finish, I've done 3, even though I've been a part of all these anthology books, like 20 some, I've done 3 actual books. One of them, I've never sold a copy. That sounds strange. It was very intentional. It was a book called, I thought I might have a copy here, but it was called Standing Ovations from Every Customer. It was a parable about customer service. And I literally, the plan was I would send it to decision makers and say, I want to send you this free book. And what happened was people would hire me to speak. So it was never meant to be sold. The only real book previous to the current one that was like a full, this is Corey's launch, was a book called The Book of Why and How. It was launched with Morgan and James Publishing. And yay for me, I launched the Kindle version sometime in 2019, and it did really well. But yay for me, the day I was supposed to be on the red carpet holding my book and saying, this is me, for Morgan James in Nashville, was the day they announced COVID was a pandemic worldwide. So
Got
great
it.
time launching a book. But the answer to your question, yes, I launched, that book was my first real big launch. And then now I'm in the mix of the biggest launch I've ever done.
All right, well, let's talk about this book. So we have The Enlightened Passenger, and I heard you speak about it, and I'm reading it, so I'm probably about halfway through it. And I know this, you talk about this sort of being channeled, if you will, like it sort of came to you, and it's sort of not out of body, but it was divinely inspired, and it wasn't, and it is a parable. It's not, even though it's still a how-to book, you're doing it through a story and through a story. But my curiosity is that I couldn't help but wonder if there are parts of you in both of the main 2 characters on the plane, and sort of where you got that inspiration from, or if it's somebody that you've studied with, someone that or someone you've observed, or one of your clients.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great question because it's a question I probably should have asked as I was writing it and or once I was done. Um, the first part is yes, I feel it was a book that was channeled through me. It's, I mean, what we've talked about up until this point, like customer service and sales, it's complete deviation from that. But I'm a Gemini, and I always say I have to both sides. I have the business side, but then the very artistic side, who was originally a spiritual skeptic and now who's more all in. But having said that, yes, the answer about the characters, I didn't know this when I wrote it, which I think, like everything, I knew on some level when I was writing it. I think my subconscious knew, but on a conscious level, I never thought, let's put me into these characters. And even after I wrote it, I never looked back enough to go, wait. But I don't know, but a year after, not a year after, probably about 6 months after, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm part of both of these characters. And when I say part of, what I mean is the character that's that arrogant, I know it all type person in the book, Robert. I was never that person, like arrogant, and he's not super arrogant, you know what I mean? Like very much into himself and that. I wasn't that person, but I also didn't realize there was anything beyond what I was doing. Like I didn't know about self-help. I didn't know that about even meditation, or that was like foreign to me. So I didn't know any of those things. And so I feel like that part of Robert is me. And then Treb, who, is described as more like a Wayne Dyer-esque person. I'm not, a Wayne Dyer level or insert name here, but I feel like I'm closer than I ever was. So it's my journey, basically, both characters. It's like me where I started, but just not fully 100%, to me where I'm going, but still not 100 fully percent there. But it is definitely me in both of those people. So, and actually the stories within there, as you're reading them, there's so many things that people that know me already pointed that out. They're like, oh, I knew this was something you took from your life because I mentioned that Treb did stand-up comedy. It was so random, but it's apart from my background. Gina, in a lot of ways, is my common law wife, Shelley. And there's like stuff from there. Like, for example, I talk about what's your best day? What's that magical moment? And I share in the story. I don't know if you're there yet, but Treb says one of those magic moments was I was at Massey Hall in Toronto watching Buddy Guy, the blues musician, play a solo and looking at Gina. Well, that I was at Massey Hall and watched Buddy Guy, but Shelley wasn't there with me. And I thought the only thing that could make this moment more perfect is if Shelley was here and I was watching her listening to a solo. So what I'm getting at is I wrote into it what was really out of life. I wrote into it the other part I wish would have been there, which would have made it the perfect moment. And so it is loosely based on my life in many ways. Like I was just talking to somebody about Lisa Nichols and how like Lisa's mentioned in it and something she talks about often, which is don't fill from your cup until it's overflowing into a saucer. Whereas a lot of people say fill from your cup when it's full, but she makes the good point that if you do that, you're never getting to 100% because you start giving away as soon as you're at 100. So I love that story. Well, in the story, Treb talks about interviewing Lisa and how she said that to him. Well, again, that was me. She said it to me, but I just worked it into Treb. So yes, the book is loosely based on my life, and both characters are loosely based on me as well.
So why a fictional parable instead of just a straight up help book?
I mean, that's another great question. That the book of why that I mentioned was a straight up help book, and I'm still proud of that book. I still to this day I still talk about that book on shows. We still, my wife loves that book, so she was just at the local bookstore and she's trying to get them to bring me in for a book signing, and she convinced them, and I think ordered 10 copies of that book, like the book that's like 4 years old. So I do believe in that book, and I do believe in those type of books. And Think and Grow Rich and How to Win Friends were the two books I first read. They changed my life. They got me into reading. So it is a good question of why would I deviate? Well, the reason I think is the other books that changed my life were The Alchemist, The Celestine Prophecy, The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari by Robin Sharma. Og Mandino is who I was heavily into whenever I came up with the concept for this book. Well, Og Mandino's, most of his books were like this. They were a short parable. And I think it's just where I was at the time when I realized I want this to be the story I'm going to share. I think at the time, I came up with an idea, and I don't want to tell it to you or anybody else because there's some twists in the book that you're not there yet too. But the concept of what that twist is what helped me come up with the book. And because of that, once I saw how can I bring this to life, I felt like I couldn't get to there with a nonfiction book. It had to be a parable and a fictional. But I think it's also because those books changed my life, and I've always loved those styles. The Celestine, it's referenced heavily in the first chapter because I did quite a bit of work with James Redfield, and we were working on a documentary about his work that COVID sidelined, and now he's working on a new book. So, it's still sidelined. But the point being is that I spent a lot of time immersed in learning about synchronicity through him. And so, again, I thought the best way to teach that was through a parable. So again, you're far enough to know that Treb sits next to James on a plane and learns about synchronicity. And so again, I think it was just a way for me to share these things and insights, but still get to that story that really inspired the whole thing in the first place. So I think that's why a parable.
And there was no judgment in that. I was just curious because and I mean, maybe I'm making this parallel now. I've written 3 books and they're all pretty much like a how-to self-help kind of book, even though, I have some stories in there. And as I started to write my next book, which I started working on last year, but then I stopped because I have a new how-to. There's new, like, as I create things, I'm like, okay, it's time. I've done this several times with many groups. I'm ready to teach it and put it in a format that more can have for a less price, less commitment, and sort of just spread the word a little bit and introduce the work. But as I started to write it, I realized that, and it won't be a parable, but when I started to write it, I thought, no, that's not what this book wants to be. This book wants to be very deep and very personal, and through stories really engage people. And I'm guessing through the success of your work, I know through the success of my work, one of the things that I think is kind of what I've been able to create with my podcast or with my community is this deep sense of trust because of my like sharing my story, being vulnerable. I have I say the thing I say right now at the beginning of our interview for the YouTube people, because like when I have really famous people that I interview, I used to put them on, put the video on YouTube, and then but I never did the disclaimer. And I would get so many negative comments because they'd come for the famous person and they're like, who's this girl? Why is she talking so much? Can you shut up? Can I hear who I'm here to talk to, like listen to? Which I totally get. But I'm like, no, this is my show. This is my conversation. So no, I'm not going to shut up. It's my show. And again, on the podcast, the relationship is with me. On YouTube, the relationship is with my guest. So in order to sort of, but what I think keeps the people, and I've heard plenty of like, oh, we want more solo shows, like from my audience, is because of the relationship that gets built. And I want, like when I announced my divorce, I'd heard some feedback that people did pull over to the side of the road because they cried, and right, like I want that kind of response from my next book. And in order to do that, there's some things that I still have to live a little bit longer in order for me to get back to, because I'm an awesome producer. I can put content out. I could write a book. I could write a book every week, but I want this to be meaningful and so like fully charged. And so I understand the way that a parable is effective more so than a straight up how-to book is the story puts you in the character's seat. So people can relate to the story versus I think in a self-help book or a how-to book, whether it be money or whatever, like you're not in it. Maybe you're in the stories, but you're reading the information and it's detached from you. And so I think the value of a parable or the value of a story, or having it be your personal story, is that people get to then embody and be just like when you're watching a movie or when you're watching a play, like you get to connect with the character as if they're yourself, and people can connect with each one of the characters in your book and like parts of them. And they can say, well, what part of me is the 25-year-old, super successful, arrogant, I don't need to be taught anything person? And how many of me as the wise person has learned things and wants to share that with people? And maybe it'll get people to think about what they've learned, because I think it feels like these 10, is it the 10 things? The 10 things that you teach in the book are, 10 lessons that you've learned since you started selling copiers, right? And through all the people that you've interviewed and the experiences that you had. And so it's still a self-help book. It's still here's the lessons. The lessons are very in your, like, you're being taught a lesson, because even Treb says, I'm going to teach you 10 lessons. So like, and you're going to hear that. So looking at them, so they're all on the book site. And so the link is thisisthebook.com. And this is the book.com. I will definitely have all the links in the show notes or right under the video here so that you can buy the book. And there's a lot of different things we'll talk about before we're done today. All that's what's offered along with the book, because as we talked the other day, like my last book that I wrote when I wrote it the first time, because I did a second edition this year, The Invisible Fitness Formula, I thought, okay, well, people I don't want them to just pick this up and read how to get their health better and their diet and their exercise and their hormones and then their emotional things. Like, they need to be taken through a more accountable program. And so so there's 5 secrets in my book. So I made a 5-month program. And I filmed 5, so 4, so 20 videos. Does that work out? 5 times 4? Yeah, 5. So 20 videos. Oh, there were more videos because there was like the beginning videos and the assessment videos, and then there were extra cooking videos. So let's say I did like 30 videos for this product that was to go along with the book. So I understand, which you've done something sort of similar. although in different ways. So let's talk about just briefly, and again, everybody, because I want you to check out the book and get the book, obviously. And actually, maybe before we do that, just because I want to feel like I want to complete the chapter of before this book happened, let's talk about your podcast, because of course, podcast listeners listen to podcasts. And so if by this point they're intrigued, they're interested, they're sharing this episode with their husband, because he, or a friend or someone or a son, somebody, and I'm only saying men because I don't have as many men on the show. And so it's always nice when there's a man on the show for them to go, here, you won't listen to JJ, here, listen to this person. Like, he's saying the same thing, but you'll hear it from him because he's a guy. But in terms of sales training or entrepreneur, let's talk about your podcast so people know. I know that you're still doing them, they're there, and I want them to know, so that's an easy, accessible, free thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will add just one thing to what you said, and then it's kind of a natural. I'll start with the podcast. It's kind of related to the book, but I will say to your point about why a parable, because it was popping in my head as you were sharing, the books that you've written and the direction you took, is I will say writing a parable at this point was, now risky is a tough word to say, because what's really risky? I mean, it's like some people say, well, I won't leave my comfortable job because it's risky to start a business. But I would argue that, there's less security these days, maybe in working at a certain company or a job. So risky is a relative term, but I will say it was a little bit risky writing a parable, because the people that want to share it, a lot of times they're like, so I, like, as an example, I want to know how to tell people that if they want to lose 20 pounds, your book has the answer. And sometimes that's a little harder to explain with a parable. If you think like the Celestine prophecy, if you were trying to say to somebody, you should buy this book because you have this problem. What is the problem they have? And it's like even the secret, which is not really a parable, but the secret could be the same thing. What problem did it solve? Well, you could say that, if people that were searching for something more in their life, that might be the problem. But that's a hard, that's more abstract. So I will say that was a challenge at first, that I know a few people said to me, like, oh, don't write a parable, just write a self-help book, because it's easier to market and it's easier for other people to say, this is why they should buy the book. It's almost like, how you hear people say, I'm a life coach. I help people with a happiness and abundance. And you're like, how do I refer that? I know 65 life coaches that do the same. But if you said, I'm a life coach, or I'm a coach that helps people, just go back to what I said earlier, land a TEDx talk. Well, that's a lot easier to pitch to somebody. So I will say, just to finish that off, the parable was kind of tough because it was hard to explain to people, here's why you need this book. So having said that, what we did do, and it was originally planned to be part of the launch, and then it took a life of its own on, is we launched a show called The Enlightened Passenger. So obviously it seemed like branding wise, that we have a show with the same name. They talk about it for a while, then the book comes out. They're like, oh, there's a book with that same name. Also on the show, we can say that. So it was planned to be a limited run, like I thought maybe 15 episodes. Similar to, there's a book called The Road Back to You, I think it's called. It's about the Enneagrams. And they launched a podcast, 12 episodes, and the book became a New York Times bestselling book solely from the podcast. So I'm like, wow, that's powerful. I launched it originally thinking, let's do a short run. And then what happened is I kept getting really amazing guests that I had been wanting to get for years, because it was 15 minutes always. And so to be able to go to Deepak Chopra and say it's only going to be 15 minutes was an easier pitch than say, come on my podcast. And so all of a sudden we're getting like Neil Donald Walsh, Deepak, and Ken Honda. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't just stop this after 12 episodes or 15 episodes. So eventually said, okay, we're going to finish the season before the book comes out. And then as the book launches, like end of June, we're going to kick in season 2. We already have pretty much all the episodes recorded for it. So we do have that show. And right now, again, there's all the episodes I mentioned. Without me looking, there's probably 30 episodes people could binge. They're always under 15 minutes, as I mentioned. And then I also, the only other show I'll talk about, because as we talked about the other day, the other 2 shows are kind of like their own thing. They're like, one's like almost like a TED podcast, so you'd be listening to talks by other people. The 2 shows that I kind of are heavily involved in, the second one's called Let's Do Influencing. That's the one that started it all. If I looked, I think it's like 2000, and I want to say like 2005 or 4 it was launched. So it's going on 20 years. And it was launched as Conversations with Passion on Blog Talk Radio. And I launched it as an online show at the time, because iTunes wasn't even really hardly a thing for podcasts. And then eventually it evolved into a podcast. And then eventually I realized the word passion was going out of style. people kept saying to me, I'm sick of hearing people say you got to find a passion. And I realized that people were tired of hearing the word when they're searching the show and they see the name, they might not ever listen. So I eventually changed it to Let's Do Influencing, which is a play on coffee, of course. It's like, let's talk influencing. But I will say the idea is we bring on influencers, but honestly, we talk about everything. Like I brought on dog whisperers to talk about how what our dog acts like will tell an influencer what their life is like. Or somebody, even people, relationship experts, because influencers get divorced too. Influencers get married too. And so it's not really just a show about influence, it's a show about influencers. And also I use that term loosely because I think of it more as thought leaders. It's more just people that are, I'll say, carrying people up to the top with them. Zig Ziglar used to say, I'll see you at the top. And it's the people that are pushing people up to the top. So it's not about, because we think of sometimes the influencers of social media and I have this many followers. It's not really that. It's more, let's bring people on to talk about impacting lives and let's talk about their lives. So hopefully that answered the question, but Let's Do Influencing and the Enlightened Passenger.
Was that the show that you were representing at New Media Summit?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, when you start back up again, I'd love to be considered to come on that show. And then the 15-minute show makes me laugh because I'm like, what can you finish in 15 minutes? But I get it. Like for the high level people, that's like, oh, that's an easy ask to give you 15 minutes. I'm like, but then we're not getting to the meat and potatoes. Like there's some momentum. Like, my shows are a longer, obviously, because that builds that trust with you. Now, of course, we're not Deepak Chopra, but that's how we become Deepak Chopra, is to have this, right, to have enough time to spend together in order for people to really get to know, like, and trust you, because that's what I've experienced. But I think it's a cool concept, and I wouldn't stop it either if I was getting like the biggest names on that show. So let's talk about I want to outline not all the lessons, of course, because I want you to read the book, everybody. And even if we tell you what the lessons are, you won't be, it's like me saying, okay, well, I specialize in core wounds. I can explain what a core wound is. Doesn't mean you know what yours are or what to do about it. So these lessons, I'd love to pull out maybe three of the biggest, most impactful lessons in the book for you, whether it be at an earlier time that influenced everything, or like, just those I'm sure they're all life changing, but I'd love to pick out maybe your top three, at least in this red hot moment.
Okay, so one of them, which I can lean into the bigger lesson, we'll call it, one of them that did change my life, and it's kind of funny because it's a part of a lesson versus the lesson itself, was, and again, I don't know where you're at in the book, so I'm not sure if you've got to this point yet, but it was the idea of every person having their own mission statement. So I sometimes call it a purpose statement, and sometimes I call it a personal mission statement. But basically, for those that have heard of corporate mission statements, like I think Disney's is to make everyone, especially children, happy. Like companies have this mission statement that says this is what we stand for. Now, sometimes, as you know, JJ, sometimes they don't really stand for that. It's just something that's on a wall. But I thought about it and said, like, a lot of the biggest companies, the CEOs know the mission statement inside and out, and they could talk about it on shows when asked, but also the employees, even if they can't say the words, they live it. Like as an example, just to, pick on Disney, but it's like if Disney says we want people to leave happy, an employee knows if a kid drops an ice cream cone, they're empowered to actually replace the ice cream cone without having to go, hey, Mr. Manager, can I replace this ice cream cone? They just go get a new ice cream. And so I think if these companies have a mission statement and know that well, and it helps them be in alignment, shouldn't we, and I jokingly say, be the CEO of our own body? And so shouldn't we have our own mission statement? So that was a big one for me the day I realized I didn't have a mission statement and should have one. I didn't read it anywhere or anything. I just thought about it and said, I was sitting in an office selling photocopiers actually. And I'm like, this company has a mission statement, and it was a good one. Like I could get it. And I'm like, why don't I have one? And then I basically wrote one down. It changed somewhat over the years. I will say the cool part about a mission statement is you can literally write one in 2 seconds right now, but it doesn't mean it's going to be the final one. Still, it's one of those things that you can get started in the easiest ways possible. So for example, if your thing is you think, I love being a parent, your mission statement could be, I want to be the best parent in the neighborhood. Like it could be as simple as that. So my mission statement today is to be the guy who motivates, donates, educates, entertains, and inspires. And so I carry that around. I have it in my wallet. It's rolled up. It's written, in hand by hand. And that's my mission statement. I did an event one time where I got these hairstylists. They were all hairstylists in the room. The oldest person I think there was 22 years old. And I actually got the 3 separate groups. I said, this group here, I want you to focus on figuring out what your passion is. And basically, they had to pick one person in the group and help them figure it out. The second group, I said, I want you to figure out who you spend your most time with and how they're impacting your life. So do like a relationship inventory. And the third group, I want you to figure out what your mission statement is. Now, as you and I both know, oh, and I said, oh, and you got 15 minutes. So as you and I both know, that's big work for 15 minutes. So all three of those were massive work. But this one group that I gave the mission statement to, I almost fell over when they came back 15 minutes later. They had an acronym, which was SMILE. The stylist who they picked for it, she said, I want to be, and I can't remember them exactly, but I want to be, let's say, the person who shares with every customer. I want to be the person that motivates my customers to live a better life. I want to be the person that inspires them. I want to be loving with them, and I want to be engaging with them. And I pointed out, if you truly live that, you'll never live or look for a hair stylist job in your life again, because clients will pay you more, they'll give you bigger tips. And if the company fires you for some foolish reason, the next one will pick you up because of all the clients that you have that love you. What I mean is that I had probably why it made sense to me at the time is I was going out with a hairstylist, and I knew that we talked about it, and she did some of those things, and her clients loved her. So again, the point is, I wrote down a mission statement for myself. I didn't come up with the sexy acronym. I was kind of jealous when I heard there's a SMILE, but the point is I carried this around, and that changed everything for me. And the reason is, and this ties into the bigger lesson out of that chapter, is the chapter's about the power of no, or making your new mantra no. And the reason for that is because of having the fortune of doing all these interviews, I've discovered that the most fulfilled people I've interviewed, the people that have impacted the most lives, say no. Now, this is kind of what I've been able to figure out with going through interviews, on average 20 to 50 times more than everybody else. So they say no to all the things that won't move the needle for the few that will. And so, and I'm, in the book, I go into how to say no. But the other one, the reason I brought up the mission statement is because it helps you figure out what a no and a yes is. Because if you know your mission statement is to be the guy that does those 5 things I mentioned, and somebody asks you to do a show about knitting, that's not going to help you do any of those 5, it's an easy no without regret. If somebody asks me to do something that's 4 or 5 of those, it's an easy yes without regret. It literally became my way to test if I'm going to do this or not. And I live my life by that now. So my no's are ones that don't support those 5 points, and my yeses are ones that do. And so that could include working with a company where they donate and give back. Well, then I get my donating one out of there. But in a perfect world, they'll also let me maybe entertain their staff or educate their staff. And so I lived by that mantra. So I think the lesson is that we need to start working on our no muscle. Most people say yes and try to figure out how to do it all. And what I've experienced is you have more sanity when you start learning what a no is. You can get more done. And the biggest thing is, I don't think we realize every time we say yes to something, that's a no to something else. So that would be one big takeaway, I think, and feel. And one big lesson in the book is the understanding that it's important to take the power back and say no a little more often.
So for those of you that are listening a couple of weeks ago, at this point, maybe it's a month. If you go back a little bit, I did a whole show on boundaries. And after this, there'll be another show on boundaries, because what I realized after I did this entire solo episode on 8 different kinds of boundaries, I didn't tell people how to create them in situations where they had none. Like I thought, because a lot of my clients, where this is a hot topic right now, it was boundaries, and I've been creating new ones for myself. And I think what's even better is if we added this whole having a personal mission statement, because like you said, it just makes it clearer. I know what I'm about because I'm doing it for a living, and because it's kept being fine-tuned over 25 years, 30 years. But for the average person who doesn't work for themselves, for them to think of a mission statement would just really clarify what's important to you and what you're about. And whether that is, and then some people might be afraid to do it because it would mean they're in the wrong profession. And so maybe it's time to quit their job, or maybe they're staying too long in their marriage, or whatever, or maybe they need to move. I know sometimes people don't want to change because what they have to give up in order to be in alignment and in integrity with themselves is maybe too scary. And so people get stuck in that. But that's a great point. And I think everybody who's listening, obviously this wasn't just for business owners or entrepreneurs or podcasters, to think about what your mission statement is. I'd love to know what they are. So go ahead and, if you're in my if you're with me on Facebook and any one of my groups, we are starting a 14-day manifestation challenge July 1st. So by the time you'll hear this, you can come and do it there, do that in the Facebook group, like share your mission statements, because we want to hear them. Because I think it's actually more important, as important, but more important for those of you without businesses, because it really will, I think, add a different perspective. So that's a great one. Okay, what's another one?
So another one that popped off the top of my head that is kind of fascinating to me, that it's one that, like, it wasn't meant to be in the book originally, is the best way I can say it. There's some things that were removed from the book because it didn't, even though I felt it was super important, it didn't feel like it fit the book. And I will say the 10 lessons I put in, I kept asking myself, if I was in a room with my 2 young sons and could only tell them 10 things, what are the 10 things? So I kept testing it against that. This one here is the one probably that stayed in that surprised me, and it actually made its way in. It's like that song that you write after the album's done. You're like, I gotta put this song in. It was the same thing. And what it was, I was watching an episode of Everybody Loves Raymond. Just like, I'm one of those people that I'll put on, if I am putting on TV, it's usually background noise for me. So I put on shows that are replays because I don't feel like I missed anything. Anyway, Robert on the show said something about the mayfly, and it got me fascinated. Whatever he said about the mayfly, which I had no concept of, just, a fly that only lives 24 hours. So I didn't know that. So the mayfly only lives 24 hours. Now, here's the fascinating part. That's the male mayfly. The female mayfly lives 3 to 5 minutes. So her entire life, sadly, is just to create other mayflies. But what it got me thinking about the 24-hour one, is what would I do if I had 24 hours? Now, this isn't like, what are the things I have to do before I die? That wasn't really what I was thinking in that concept. We do talk in the book about the power of writing your obituary, which some people find really morbid. We do talk about that. But with this one, I'm talking about, what does a perfect day look like? So in other words, what would you do if today was a perfect day? And so I looked at it like, you only had 24 hours. How would you live that perfect day? And then what's fascinating in the book, I shouldn't say fascinating, but what's interesting is Robert starts rhyming off all these things that you could never do in a day. Like, I'm going to learn to play guitar because women love guitar, like that type of thing. And Treb got him a little bit more practical. But then when he finally got him practical, he said, now let me ask you this question, Robert. Why aren't you living like that today? And I think for us, there's a big reflection in there. If you sat down and literally said, what would I do on my favorite day? Like, I would do this on my favorite day. I would do a podcast interview. I would play guitar on my favorite day, because I do play guitar. I wouldn't learn to play guitar from scratch, but I would play guitar. There's things I would do on my favorite day. And then the question is, why am I not living like that now? And that, by the way, as you said, somebody does run their own business. I think they think, well, that doesn't include me because I don't run my own business. I can't set my own hours. As we both know, sometimes running your own business means you can't do those things because you're actually busier. Like, people don't realize sometimes that a lot of business owners are working 70 hours a week. You can't just stop in the middle of the day usually and go, I'm going to go play guitar. But having said that, even as an employee, let's say, of a company, it's still the point of how you're living those other hours. So if there's all these things you love, are you doing those, or are you going home? And if you love binge watching TV, then that might be your thing. But if you don't, are you going home and just putting it on because it's numbing? So for me, it's like, I would love to see everybody sit down and write down, what are a big list of things I would do if I only had a day, or if this was my perfect day. And then you're not always going to relive the same day. So that's why I say do a bunch of them, but make sure you have some of those things in every single day. So that's really the lesson there, is figure out what you would put on your perfect day if you only had 24 hours to live.
Great exercise. I recommend. I will be doing it also. Well, in this red hot moment, I'm in a like 60-day completely deep scrub, so this is not the ideal perfect day, but it's only a limited amount of time. But normally, I do like to at least give myself 1 or 2 days during the week where it's literally anything I want to be doing. Like, on Sunday nights, so some of my new boundaries are I go dancing on Sunday nights. Salsa dancing, because I finally found like a good place. I don't like that it's on Sunday nights, but in the salsa world, that's just what it is. Like, you start dancing late. So I went to this great place. I have an amazing time. I feel great. I come home. I don't sleep as long as I would normally, but then I get up and I go to the beach and I go run on the beach, and then I come back and I do my qigong class, and then I meditate, and then I come back and then I have something to eat, and I have acupuncture. Like, that's what my Sunday to Monday looks like almost every single week. Fridays, lunch out with the friends, going hiking with Doug, whatever, go hot tub. Like, so whether you aim to do it every day, your perfect day, 24 hours, I think there is at least knowing all the different points. Like, what are the favorite things that you love to do? And then are there days and times that you can put that in? So I think that's a great exercise for all of you to be doing, is create at least 1 or 2 24-hour perfect days. So that way, at least you have the clues about the most important things that you keep putting off and saying, oh, I'll do that later. I'll do that when I'm retired. I'll do that when I go on vacation. And it's like, no, how do you get that in now? Because obviously, if it's your perfect day, I agree with you. I think that's a great lesson. I want you to finish up with, and maybe I don't know which one you wanted to share, but it's the first lesson. It's the first lesson that is in the book, I believe. I think that word, I want you to share it because I think it's cool, the Japanese word. And so if that's okay.
So now I'm now making sure. Do you mean there's 3 I'm thinking of off the top of my head. I think we use 3 Japanese words in it, so it depends on where it's at. But we use arigato, we use sensei, beginner's mindset. Is that the one you're
Yes.
thinking?
Yeah.
Shoshin, isn't it? Shoshin.
Yeah.
Shoshin. Okay. And it's I think it's either Shoshin or Shoshin. But yeah, I had to ask because there's literally 3
Three
Japanese.
Japanese words in the book. Oh, you can tell
Yeah.
I'm not far enough that I've gotten to a second one
You know,
yet. So
you know Ken Honda is?
I feel like I do.
He wrote the
But
book Happy Money. Anyway, you'll see
okay.
why arigato works around Ken. And there's also ikigai, which I
Mm-hmm.
don't think you've gotten there yet either. So there was 3 words. So I just want to make sure I got the right one. So yeah, the beginner's mindset. This one here is, I guess, again, this was another part taken from my life. I mentioned earlier, whenever I first started, I didn't even know this self-help world, professional help development world existed. And so I went into it going, yeah, I've already heard that before. I've already heard this before. And the funny part is I was just starting my journey and I thought I already knew it all. It was like 21. And I just thought I already knew it all. Like when I watched that Zig Ziglar video that I mentioned, the first time I watched it, I'm like, I already know all this. And then I went the next day, I had 7 days of training with 1 VHS. So then I went back and I said, I'm going to watch this again with new eyes. And when I thought about it from what could I learn from this, it changed. So I went into a lot of things with what I think I even call it this in the book, the I already knew this hat on my head, where like I already heard this before, I already knew this. And it took me 20 years, maybe not all of those 20 years, but some of 20 years to realize that the people that I admired that were living a fulfilled life, that were impacting all these lives, were actually going into everything with a beginner's mindset, even though if they already knew 10 times more than me. And like you said, this is a concept in Japan where it's like you need to come at everything with a beginner's mindset. Like you just a ground slate, wipe slate clean, and you're starting from scratch. And so for me, that was it was something that was crucial for my development, is that I was stinting my own development by constantly coming into things thinking, I already know this, I already know that. They can't teach me anything new. And I literally had to rewire that, which is kind of ironic because now I've interviewed 7,500 people and I feel like I'm still just starting. It's funny that when I hadn't interviewed anybody, didn't know anybody's story and all this stuff, I thought I had already knew it all. And I'll give you a really good visual for this that I heard one time. I was interviewing a person one time and he shared this story. He said he was sitting at the back of the room. To me, this sums up that person that has the I already knew this hat on versus the beginner's mindset. It's a great visual, I think. He said, I was sitting at the back of a room at a Tony Robbins event. And he said, it just so happened, this was years and years ago, Jack Canfield was sitting at one of the tables. And Jack from Chicken Soup for the Soul, who's taught how many people, runs the TLC, Transformational Leadership Council, with some of the top leaders, learned from the best of the best. And he said, and Jack was in his 60s at this point, I think, but he said Jack was there and he's taking notes like crazy. He's flipping the pages. He's taking all these notes, even though Jack would probably be invited later that day to go back and talk to Tony directly. So he could learn it from Tony, but he's still taking all these notes. And the guy said on the other side, the other table next to Jack, there's this guy that looked like he may have been 19, and he's looking over Jack, shaking his head. Almost like, look at this old fool taking all these notes. And he goes, how appropriate is it that this kid at 19 needs Jack's notes more than Jack ever will again? But yet Jack is still trying to learn every day of his life. And I got to interview the late Zig Ziglar the last year of his life. And he had short-term memory loss. He was 84, I believe, at the time. And when I asked him about books, do you still read books? He goes, oh, yes. And he said, but I only read books now that are either true or biographies. And he said, basically something I can learn from. Like, in other words, he wasn't reading fantasy or anything like that at that point. But I thought, here's a guy who knows it's winding down. and he's still spending all of his time learning. Here's Jack Canfield, who I bet you to this day is still reading books and still learning from people. And yet, how many of us sit there going, can't teach me nothing new? So the takeaway from that is, I think if we want to really have a fulfilling life, we need to come back to a beginner's mindset and realize that, in my opinion, the day we stop learning and growing is the day we start dying.
No, agreed. And, I can definitely be both of those people. But what I think for me, the difference would be in the language, in the beginner's mindset. And there's nothing wrong with being a beginner, but that lessons can be disguised. And that when you hear someone or three people teach the same thing, it's not only, and here's something to think about for anyone who's listening, that you guys know me pretty well. It might be like, so me listening to someone else teach law of attraction is like, okay. And not because I think I know everything about law of attraction, because I listen to Abraham all the time. But it's more of, well, if I'm to listen to someone else, it's not that they know something different or better, or it's that the delivery. When you're detached, it's almost why you wrote a parable. When the story isn't about you, it's like what happens in my mastermind groups or any of the coaching groups. The reason why I do the groups is because if one person comes to the table and has an issue or whatever, and I'm coaching that person directly in that moment on a Marco Polo, someone else is hearing it so much better and in taking it in so much deeper than they would have if I was talking directly to them. Because being that observer who's watching and listening, it's easier. Like you're not in defensive mode, you're not in like fight or flight mode, you're right, and you can take in information. It's like why when I have coaches that work with me, I record my sessions and then I always go back and watch it. And I'm not going to say I get more out of watching it for myself, but I get like more than working with them, but I definitely get more because I'm now watching myself. And it's from this curiosity, because when you're in reaction mode or when you're in front and center mode, you can't help but, if whether it be defensive, ego, blah blah blah, whatever, like it's just another way to hear it. It's about frequency. And if you listen over and over again to different people teaching the same thing, you'll get something from all of them. It's like why would you watch a movie 20 million times? It's because you see something new every single time, because your brain goes, yeah, I know all these things. Oh, I didn't see that before. And it becomes exciting all of a sudden to like realize something. So sometimes it just stimulates us to think of something different. We are all, I mean, let's just consider that our conscious brain, which is only 12%, it doesn't get used to its full capacity ever. Retention is about, like, I have a high retention rate, but most people have like a retention rate less than 10% of what you hear. So that would mean you need to listen to it at least 10 times to probably get what the person was talking about. So keep that in mind. And that's why I like that beginner's mind, because if you are open to, maybe there's some key things that you've heard before, but that's not what you're listening for. You're listening for either how you might realize it differently, or it stimulates a new thought or idea, or, I can't go learn. I have a couple classes that I have online that I'm taking myself, and I can't even start doing the class without my brain getting downloads of content and information. It's like, oh my God. And I have this sort of attitude of like, okay, yeah, I know some of this, but I'm in it. I'm like, okay, but I'm in it. I'm committed. I'm curious. I'm listening. But then my brain goes, oh, but here's all these other ideas coming at you. So I think it's a great attitude to have. And I think that there are so many great lessons that this book offers. So let's just talk about that. It's when it's going to be published, some of the bonuses that are coming. Obviously, it's a book, so it's priced as a regular book. So we're not talking about any big investment here. But you do offer some upsells and some free stuff that goes along with it, some bonuses if people get the book. What is the deadline for getting those bonuses? Like when do they have to have the book purchased by?
Yeah, so thank you so much. I love that, and most people don't mention the deadline. I think it's very important, especially with an evergreen show. So I mean, I always want it to be at least one bonus that'll be there. And I plan to leave the website up with at least one bonus. So I don't want to leave those people out that might hear this a year from now and go, I missed all out, that type of thing. But the pub date, as the industry term, the pub date, the day that it literally, if you order it, it's shipped that day, is June 25th. So, as a person's listening to this, it's within a couple of weeks. And so that's the pub date. It is available for pre-order now. And to your point, we do have bonuses on for those that grab it during the pre-order. Now, as far as a deadline, I don't have a hard and fast deadline of the bonuses will disappear by this date, but I feel like it'll be on at least till mid-July. and maybe the end of July, where you can get these bonuses we're talking about. My takeaway would be, if you hear this and you think you want it, I would just get it as soon as you hear it, because that's the one part I'm not sure. Usually when people do a launch like that, the bonuses kind of disappear within a week of the pub date. Well, I don't even know the reason to make them disappear that quick. So I'm not necessarily thinking along those lines, but I would say no matter what, I'm going to leave it up till mid-July. So having said that, as far as the bonuses, yeah, the way we structured this, honestly, JJ, I feel like we overdid it. You talked about earlier, right from early on, full circle, doing those seminars at $75. I feel like the same thing we've done with the book. And I think a lot of people do that with a book. I always say the best time to get everybody's best stuff is when they put a book out. And so the book is $16.95. It's not even, I would say, a regular price. So $16.95 US. And it's available at the various places. But the benefit of getting it through our website, which you mentioned earlier, is that when you get it that way, we can deliver the bonuses to you. If you go to the retailer on your own, we don't know how to deliver the bonuses. We don't know you bought it. So the cool thing is, if you go to the website, all the direct links right to the retailer of your choice is there. So I want to point out, you're still paying the same price. You're still getting it at the same place. But what you do is you come back to our website, which you mentioned, which is thisisthebook.com. You come back to that site and just enter an order number. That's the only thing you add to that. And the bonuses themselves, there's 5 bonuses that are instant. You get immediately. Some of them, it'll depend on what world you're in, whether or not they'll be as applicable to you. So I'll tell you the 5 of them really quick. But one is one of the popular things that we've done over the years is people want to know how to land a TED Talk. And so we have a higher, we'll call it ticket. People don't use that term, the higher priced TEDx program. But this is like a training we did inside one of our inner circles. That's the condensed version of that. And so for anybody that's dreamed about landing a TED Talk or any branded talk, you get that. Again, $5,000, part of a $5,000 program. It's just one of the bonuses. Another one for those that might be in business or want to get in business, or they work for somebody where they are part of selling the product, is a talk I did at Stanford around what I discovered when I studied all the top companies like Apple, Harley, Disney. What do they do that allows them to charge a premium price? So like, what are the 5 things they're doing different than everybody else? So there's that course. But then if we get into the stuff that I would say is going to be more relevant to everybody, is we have one thing is a PDF of my top 10 insights that I've learned during all these interviews. So it's like a picture of the person I learned it from. Let's say it was Deepak Chopra, and what's the top thing I learned from him? So this is me figuring out what are the top 10 things I've ever learned out of 7,500 interviews. So it's a PDF of that. The next thing is you get a free copy of one of my books, a digital version. And then finally, maybe friends of yours, Natalie Ledwell and Patrick Ledwell, did a thing for us for a member site we had, where they recorded some training around how they launched a business. But Natalie really dives into they own mind movies, and she launches into how to set goals and achieve them, how to manifest. And their stuff is based on a visual vision board, like a video vision board. So they took a unique take from The Secret and did really well. So anyway, these are, I think, 3 videos of them sharing what they learned and even how they work and run a business as a couple who's divorced, which that's on its own is a very unique thing. So those are the 5 instant bonuses. But then here's something that's really wild to me is you also get to attend, if you want to, multiple live events that are pretty special events. So for instance, June 14th. So if you're listening between the 11th and 14th, grab this. I will say we'll send it a replay if you missed it. But June 14th, we're doing an event with Brian Austin Green from Anger Management 90210, Randy Spelling from 90210 in Malibu Shores, and what's her name? Sharna Burgess, which is Brian's wife from Dancing with the Stars. So that's going to be cool, because I'm saying surely it's going to be a bit of a mix between 90210 and business, because all 3 of those people are very enlightened. So it will go in different directions than you would probably imagine. And then beyond that, we have an event coming up with Janet Atwood and Ken Honda. That's on the 28th, I believe, or 27th. I have to check that. And then we also have our large 3-day virtual boot camp. We have Marie Diamond that's joining us for that. It's completely live. It's honestly networking. You get access to a life coach, one life coach session of your choice, a bunch of prizes. We talk with people about their successes and dreams and lives. And then we also do stuff around how to write books and all that kind of stuff. So that's a 3-day boot camp. We used to charge $97, and this comes for free with the book. So and the last part I should mention too is we're going to be doing 2 book clubs. And so we're doing really big nights for book clubs because I recognize that we need to get people to read the book too. So we're doing book club nights. I can't say names yet because they're not fully confirmed, but I can tell you the people we're talking to have been in The Secret, on Oprah, have sold millions of books, like really big names. Two of them I've never interviewed before. We're trying to lock in. But basically, we're going to do 2 nights of this. So if you get the book, you also can basically add yourself to the list on the back end, and then you'll know when the book clubs happen. And basically, you can come to these book club nights, and they're just going to be special nights where you get to go in your own breakout rooms and talk about the book and what you learned, then come back and have this mega special guest. So basically, everything I just said comes with it. And then also on top of that, we're also doing some prizes that you get in for if you buy the book. So I think that's a lot for $16.95.
Yeah, that's a live event, all of it, like videos, live events, all kinds of stuff for 16.95. So, if anything Corey has talked about is of interest to you, you feel at all a ping of oh, I could use that. Don't hesitate for 16.95. Buy it now so you can get all the bonuses. Corey, definitely good podcaster because you and I could keep talking. So I appreciate your time and I look forward to getting the book in hard copy. Got to buy my copy soon so I can get all the bonuses too. And I appreciate you coming on the show and I hope everybody will get the Enlightened Passenger. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, JJ. Thank you, everybody. Till next time.